Welcome back. Well, that was just amazing to experience that. Wow, I'm sure Toby is still kind of reeling. I feel so honored to be here sharing the screen right now with Rashad Robinson. Rashad is the president of Color of Change. Rashad is also our final guest this evening and of the summit. And what better way to cap off a day on impact with a person who really personifies that word, impact, because Rashad, over the past decades, he's taken on everything, all the way back to high school. And in Rashad's latest role, Rashad's pushed hard for racial justice in all aspects of life, from our criminal justice system to social media to the entertainment industry. And wow, where to begin? Rashad, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
First of all, I just want to acknowledge how especially generous it is of you to be here tonight, because this is a really important week for you and for Color of Change. We're all marking the 1-year anniversary of the death of George Floyd with this, and you all are particularly marketing with a series of events, with your week of action. And I guess as part of today, Thursday, this is the day that Color of Change set aside to celebrate Black joy, which I love so much. I've seen it all over social media today. Tell me a little bit about some of the things that you've been doing today.
Well, some of the things we've been, featuring all different aspects of the community, talking about what Black joy means to them. Black joy for us at Color of Change is one of the centerpieces of our advocacy and our activism work. And Black joy is not the absence of pain, but the presence of aspiration, not just what we are fighting against, but what we are fighting for. And in so many of the ways in which we try to bring people together to actually accomplish big things, we center Black joy. We center sort of relational organizing. I fundamentally believe that leadership in activism is not being a spokesperson for people who are not heard, but about building the vehicles and the infrastructure so that people can be heard for themselves, building the vehicles so that folks feel like they can take on powerful forces and actually win, building the infrastructure that can be a force multiplier for change, and change that can happen immediately and change that can happen over time. And so when we bring people together in the spirit of Black joy, I think it's incredibly important, because we're not just trying to center what we don't want, but we're trying to center all the ways in what we do want. And Black people, Black joy, right, has been such a centerpiece of what has made this country what it is, from all of the things we've contributed, from food and culture and politics, to the innovations we've had to make in the entrepreneur space. All of that, I think, is part of Black joy and part of the sort of resilience and sort of purposeful contributions that Black people have made to this country and to the world.
I love that so much. Rashad, we are, this conference is about entrepreneurship. And of course, entrepreneurship doesn't necessarily mean for-profit making.
Yeah.
It can, entrepreneurship is found all across the board, including in activism, in what you do, because so much of it is about creative ways to create disruption. You've been an activist your whole life. You literally grew up, I think, in an activist home.
Yeah.
And from a very early age were involved in different campaigns. You got involved in political organizing in high school. You even hosted a political talk show, I think, on your local access station when you were younger. Why did you pursue a life of activism?
I pursued a life. I've pursued my purpose. I've pursued fighting for the people I care about and fighting for myself. And that has led me into a world of activism. But as much as I grew up in a home that was where activism was part of how we sort of engage, I remember being picked up from soccer practice or, after school activities, and NPR would be on. And so we would talk about the news and we would talk about the world. But my parents, didn't go to college. I'm the first in my family to go to college. My parents weren't paid activists. My father was a contractor on Eastern Long Island and worked setting tile, and still does, is still self-employed to this day. I think 47 years in business, in in a world where there wasn't a lot of Black entrepreneurs. And so even how I've thought and approached my work has always been about trying to find the avenues to contribute. And when there weren't sort of the doors that were open, I've oftentimes tried to find the places to build doors. And I've always thought of myself in this work as a builder of building space, of building movement, of building avenues and infrastructure for us to win things that we couldn't possibly win. And so I grew up in an activist home, but I never really knew until I got much older that this could be sort of a job or a life. You know, as a young activist, people would say, particularly in the Black community, that I should either run for office, and I've done everything I could to run from office, and or that I should be a minister. And those were some of the things that people would oftentimes say. And I feel like in both those cases, people were, I think, speaking to this idea of being of service. And I think that's what I continue to try to do.
I think over the past year, I read that Color of Change has seen incredible growth. I mean, it's sort of strange to talk about a social mission activist organization as experiencing growth, but it's true, right? Like we talk about startups, it's been an incredibly important year. I think your email list alone has gone from like 1.5 million people to almost 7 million, maybe more by this point, which is just incredible. We're going to talk a lot about the different, sort of the different themes that you have focused on and rallied around over the past year. But I'm curious, how do you, as a leader, because so many of the people watching tonight are thinking about impact. How can I have an impact? How do you measure that for yourself and for the organization?
Yeah, we think about it a couple of ways. First, we have this kind of central sort of premise to our work that I've really tried to include in all the things that we do. And it's not mistaking presence for power. Presence is visibility, awareness, retweets, shout outs from the stage. Presence is not bad, but when we mistake presence for power, we sometimes think we've done things that we haven't actually done. We mistake a Black president for thinking that we are post-racial. We may mistake America's love for Black celebrities and Black culture for thinking that America loves Black people as much as America loves Black culture, and America can love, celebrate, and even monetize Black culture and hate Black people at the same time. And so that standard of not mistaking presence for power is really about recognizing that power is the ability to change the rules. And that is really where we start at in terms of impact. But across all of our campaign work, we really had to search for ways to build impact tools that did not exist for us, because social activism, our bottom line is not money. Our bottom line is justice. If our budget goes up and we're not actually winning more campaigns, then we have to question that. And so we built this rubric that really sort of has sort of on one axis we really look at sort of the impact in the world, from what we think about as momentum achievements, things that we kind of know are chipping away at structures but haven't actually won us anything systemic to make that's tangible, all the way up to what we talk about as systemic victories, where laws have been changed. And then, on the other axis, we really look at our relative role in that work, because digital media, social media can make us sometimes think you send out an email and all of a sudden something changes and people say, oh, we did this. And you probably didn't do it if you don't have sort of the receipts to back it up. And so across all of our campaign work, we really create goals across the organization, try to really work to hold folks accountable for what does it mean to actually contribute. And so we talk about things that are what we call pile-on victories. And those are just things that would have happened without us, all the way to things that couldn't have happened without us. And we try to be in that space of things that couldn't happen without us, or things where we played a unique role, a value add that if we were not there, it might not have happened at all. And so that is one of the ways in which we try to hold ourselves to a standard where the news cycle can move so quickly. Digital media can make you think that you've either done something or that you haven't done something, and that we can constantly evaluate where we are putting our energy. The final thing I'll say about this is that in this presence versus power space, it's incredibly important that we keep a real focus on strategic action. That means that there are so many things that can feel like whack-a-mole, that game at the carnival where something pops up, you hit it down, something else pops down, you hit it down, or you don't, or you miss it altogether. But we constantly try to look at what does it mean to drive campaigns where we have real leverage. So you're not going to see a campaign from Color of Change that says, tell Mitch McConnell to stand up for affirmative action. As much as we may want Mitch McConnell to stand up for affirmative action, there's no amount of Color of Change members signing a petition or building a campaign that's going to get him to do that. And so that's asking people to engage in something that we know we don't have a theory of change around. So having theories of change is also incredibly important to how we think about impact, but how we think about asking people for their time and their energy in our efforts.
You know, one of the things that is so profound about what you're working on is that there's no timeline. You know, I mean, there's no, well, in 6 months' time, we are going to solve systemic racism. I mean, it is a potentially never-ending struggle. There's no limit. I mean, there's no end date. And I wonder how you think about victory and victories. How do you, I mean, do you sort of step back and look at, let's say, a timeline that has no end, but still recognize certain things as victories?
Absolutely. I mean, that's what you have to do. And along the way, you're trying to create a more human and less hostile world. And if we can create a more human and less hostile world, and we can remove the sort of barriers that stand in the way of people being able to have society on their side, achieve as much as possible, that over time can multiply and create more and more opportunity. And that's how we think about this work. We also recognize that people don't experience issues, we experience life, that the forces that hold us back are deeply interrelated. A racist criminal justice system requires a racist media culture to keep it alive, to create the demand for it, to protect it. Political inequality goes hand in hand with economic inequality. These things all operate together. And so that does get us back to sort of the thing I started with, which is power, right? And this idea that we're constantly trying to raise the floor on what's acceptable and push up the ceiling on what's possible. And when we do that, we create new space for new things to happen. And hopefully new flowers to bloom that maybe we actually weren't responsible for. But because we've maybe changed the narrative, or we changed the landscape, or we've changed what's possible, then more things can occur as a result.
So much of what you have to do, Rashad, as a leader of such a massive organization that is addressing one of the most if not the most challenging series of issues in human history, is persuasion, is literally articulating an idea, sometimes to people who may not understand it. What have you learned about the art of persuasion as somebody who is pursuing impact?
Yeah, you know, that's such a great question. I think about persuasion a lot, particularly because I've come to realize after this last summer that I always knew the power of racial justice, but this summer racial justice became a majoritarian issue. You know, Black and brown folks are not the majority, but if you look at the polling, if you look at the fact that when many people thought the best we could do in terms of activism was clap outside of our windows or uplift investigative journalism, racial justice moved people to the streets, moved people to action. And so if you think about over the last 10 years, right, people saying Black Lives Matter and then instantly being said, well, maybe you should just say Black Lives Matter too, or it's racist to say that, to now it being, not that it's not controversial, but now it's on streets in front of capitals. It's raised up on signs. That is the power of persuasion. When I think about white folks in a Starbucks in Philadelphia seeing a police interaction that they knew wasn't quite right and take out their phones and film it and then know to post it, that is a form of persuasion. So persuasion is not just about some sort of messaging, it's about narrative, because narrative, once again, is about power, about the rules and norms of society, what is acceptable and what is possible. And so, we also think a lot about the stories we tell. And what I mean about that is far too often we tell stories about inequality that are unfortunate, right? Almost like a car accident, like it sort of just happened, rather than stories that are unjust and really sort of illustrate the injustices. Stories that oftentimes start from a passive voice about the system instead of an active voice. And so what I mean by that is Black people are less likely to get a loan from the bank is what we'll oftentimes hear, instead of banks are less likely to give loans to Black people. And that may seem like semantics. But what I'm really saying here is that when you say Black people are less likely to get loans from the bank, people ask themselves, well, what's wrong with Black people? Maybe we should give them financial literacy. If we say, banks are less likely to give loans to Black people, then we ask ourselves, what's wrong with the banks? And so we don't need financial literacy to help Black people do better inside of institutions which have targeted, exploited, and redlined us since almost their very beginning. We actually need structural change. And so when we deal with sort of charitable solutions to structural problems, what ends up happening in our public policy is folks sending water bottles to Flint and stopping short of actually cleaning up the pipes, doing service days at inner city schools instead of actually dealing with the fact that we have deep inequities in our public education system that are not an accident, but they are manufactured. That people will say, well, the United States has 4% of the world's population and 25% of the world's incarcerated population. Let's deal with reentry instead of actually dealing with ending mass incarceration. And so for us at Color of Change, how we tell the story, how we sort of lean into a narrative that actually put the active voice on the systems that have far too often held people back and the passive voice on the people, so we don't keep trying to fix people who have been exploited, targeted, and left out, but we actually fix the systems which have done so much damage and which are oftentimes propped up by profiteers and by a society that where far too many people benefit from those systems being in place.
Rashad, I can't help but think as I listen to you and I know your story and all of the work you've done throughout your life on behalf of LGBTQ issues, on behalf of racial justice, and I'm blown away. I mean, where do you get your strength to do the work you do? Because it is emotionally exhausting.
It is absolutely emotionally exhausting. There are days where we get some of the most troubling and tragic outreaches from people in deep pain, and we may not have the resources to take it on, or we may not be the right organization, or we may not be well positioned in that moment. And so there are so many of these things that we can't take on. And so we constantly have to think about what are the moments that we can take that actually allow us to move towards systemic pivots so that we can, win change that can be sort of self-fulfilling over time and can lead to more change. But that means that there's oftentimes really hard choices that we have to make. And that is really painful, but also like I'm in these stories. I'm in these stories as myself. My family's in these stories. I sometimes see my younger self in some of these stories, and you can't take yourself out of that, and you can't center yourself at the same time. I also know that I am doing this work on top of a legacy of people who were entrepreneurs in so many ways, right? We're talking about entrepreneurship, and there's kind of like this sort of two types of entrepreneurship that I kind of see in the Black community. That entrepreneurship of that exist in so many communities of trying to build something that, adds a new service, adds a new resource, or maybe adds on to something. And then the thing for oppressed people, for Black folks, for other folks that have been marginalized, is having to build something that already exists, but you've been excluded from. And having to build the Black newspapers that, Black people literally have really created independent media in this country, building, Black films, independent films, building services that we did not have access to through Black Church or the Black Panthers or so many institutions. And so Black people have constantly had to sort of reimagine and find new ways to build things, whether it was to provide something new or whether it was to provide the same exact thing that already existed, but we were excluded from. And it's not just Black folks. I think about sort of the start of what we think about as the modern gay rights movement, LGBT movement, started in a gay bar, right? Started in Stonewall,
right.
And a place that people had to literally create because they didn't have access to other places. And so oppressed people have always had to figure out a way to be heard, counted, and visible, regardless of whether we are privileged or vulnerable, in the majority or the minority, or in favor or out of favor with whoever may be in power at the time. And those institutions and that infrastructure, I think, also is something that has sustained me because, like I said, my leadership is not about speaking up for other people who haven't been heard. My leadership is about building the vehicles for people to be heard for themselves. So I am not alone. I am not on my own. I am not out front trying to take all the bullets. I am working to build infrastructure that is bigger than me and hopefully will last far beyond me.
You mentioned that you are also part of the story, your family, people you know. How do you deal with your own mental stress and emotional stress personally?
I mean, over the pandemic, I've probably done too much retail therapy, so I'm gonna have to scale that back this summer. But I love to cook. I have an incredible network of friends and family who love me for my warts, love me for all the qualities that make me a leader, and love me when I don't always meet the mark, but give me the type of advice, encouragement, and critique that people in my position need. And I've got to say that is also something that's been really powerful. But I've been thinking a lot about what does it mean to create space for self-care, for community care. As someone who has to lead an organization of over 150 staff, right? The majority of whom are Black, the largest age range in our organization are millennials. We're asked to respond to viral videos where people see themselves or their family members in there. We're asked to constantly have to wake up and drive campaigns to fight systemic injustice, where all of my staff are part of the story. And the folks who are not seeing themselves directly impacted are inside of an organization where they're allies. And they are working to make their contributions to changing society, because they know that when Black people win, society moves in the right direction. And even if it didn't, Black people winning in and of itself would be enough. And so, that, I think, that connection I have to people is so restorative to me. And so if any of my friends are watching, know that they have definitely kept me through this year and far before that.
You've talked about, really kind of changing the architecture of what was seen as a civil rights movement. You've talked about the magical thinking that sometimes people see in advocacy work, and you just alluded to it earlier, sending water bottles to Flint when it's actually a much deeper problem, or solving, unequal education at schools, mainly attended by Black and brown students by doing mentorship and service days. That actually isn't what solves or begins to solve problems. It's a much, much bigger problem. And so I wonder, I want you to talk a little bit about this idea of architecture, like reimagining the architecture, not only of the discourse, but of the fight.
Yeah, I mean, we think a lot about architecture, and we're constantly trying to innovate the systems of how we take in information, what we have to do to respond, how do we build leverage, right? I think a lot about that a lot, even in the kind of founding story of Color of Change. And I wasn't there at the time, but I talk about it a lot because I think it really sort of illustrates how we think about power and how we think about our theory of change, right? We were founded in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina, which was a flood caused by bad decision makers that turned into a life-altering disaster by bad decision makers. And Black people literally on their roofs begging for the government to do something and left to die. And Katrina illustrated a lot of things that people already knew: geographic segregation, generational poverty, the impacts of what we've done to our planet, all the ways in which structural racism undergirds those things and so many other systems which manufacture inequality. And we could think, right, like I said before, people don't experience issues, we experience life. And so folks could say, what's the most important issue, and take that on. And then that doesn't actually move us any closer because racism is a shapeshifter. And in the sort of poll taxes become voter ID laws, Jim Crow becomes mass incarceration if you're not actually building power. And so the thing about Katrina and moments like that, you could even say this about COVID, right? Is that no one was nervous about disappointing Black people, government, corporations, and media. And so if you start off by the idea that one of the pieces of the theory of change is that we have to make decision makers nervous about disappointing us, then you start to think about, how do I build the campaigns? How do I build the structures that actually do that, right? And so if we have this idea that it's going to be people power and narrative change, we'll never have enough money to buy politicians to give them what we want. We'll never have enough proximity to truly be able to win, right? Like there is sometimes this idea that Black faces in high places in and of itself will get us where we need to go. But, we had a Black president. And so, that's about the highest place that you can get. And we know that that doesn't actually lead to structural change, even though it was great to have a Black president. But all of that to say, part of building that infrastructure is also recognizing the climate about how people are getting their information. And so we've really built this strategy of responding to moments, building energy, finding the systemic pivot, and then scaling over time. We talk about it as respond, build, pivot, and scale. And respond, build, pivot, and scale is really sort of in this digital age, how we stay out of the whack-a-mole space of just running from thing to thing. It's how we sort of still, though, respond to various moments that are happening, but then try to channel those moments and channel that energy, channel that response into things that can actually move towards systemic victories. And then if we go back to sort of the impact rubric I talked about earlier, then we can go back and sort of evaluate how did our efforts actually sort of lead to change. And sometimes some of the campaigns that we get the most visibility on, right? A campaign back during the 2016 election, we ran and we went back and forth with the Clinton campaign to get the Clinton campaign to give back their private prison donations. And we went back and forth, right? We were behind the scenes. Most of our corporate campaigns, most of our political campaigns start off behind the scenes, especially now that we've built a lot of power. Sometimes we can very much leverage folks to do things, but always with this idea, and this comes from both being 5'3" myself and having a dad who's 5'3", is that, my dad always tells me you never make a threat for a fight unless you're actually willing to come through, because people might actually take you up. And so we're always ready with that campaign. But during this time, we went back and forth and they weren't giving back the money. So we sent 2 emails to the Clinton campaign. One was a smiling Hillary that she had given back the money. The second one was a picture that was she was upset and that she hadn't given back the money. And we explained the issue. There were footnotes, and we sent both emails to the campaign. And we said, by the end of the week, we're going to send out one of these emails. You let us know which one. And they decided to the smiling Hillary email. And it was great. And Secretary Clinton and I have joked about this since, because I was dealing with her staff directly. I never actually talked to her. And they made the right decision, and it was really important and an important thing. We got a lot of press and some credit about it. But no Black people were freed from private prisons. No private prisons closed. We set a new standard around Democratic presidential candidates not accepting private prison donations. We created a new narrative around private prisons that made it harder for folks to defend them on the left, and that's important. So that's a momentum achievement. No matter how much sort of visibility and press you get, it's not a systemic victory. But knowing that difference is also important in terms of the architecture you built. So you're actually building houses, and you're building structures that are sustainable over time. If you just go around getting a bunch of momentum achievements, but you don't actually change the rules, then you've built a lot of presence, but you haven't actually achieved any power.
I keep thinking about how in a weather system, we might put an umbrella up, but actually there are these giant rivers that run deep under our oceans that determine currents and weather patterns that are fixed or semi-fixed, and we focus on these symptoms. I'm curious about this word progress, because that's been part of our cultural narrative for decades. This idea that progress happens, it's real, it's achievable. What do you think about that word progress?
I actually think progress is very tricky, right, as a word, because the systems that we are fighting are durable and strong, and they were made to be durable and strong. And sometimes they will create space for us to have cosmetic victories that aren't actually progress, right? We can have more Black millionaires and billionaires, but we still have a widening wealth gap, or we have deeper gaps. We see more Black folks getting PhDs, but then we watch sort of the public education in our country be decimated. And in all of the ways in which schools are underfunded, and even after COVID, we're dealing with even more challenges in terms of how our young people are being educated. And so it doesn't mean that we don't sort of recognize that progress. We have to sort of be inside of real conversations of hope, of achievement, while at the same time holding a very high standard around all the ways in which forces like capitalism, forces like racism, structures will realign themselves and protect themselves in order to sort of keep things going. And at the same time, our progress oftentimes comes with backlash, right? It's not a mistake, right, that after the first Black president was elected, that's when we saw that rise in those discriminatory voter ID laws. You can vote with your gun license, but not your student ID. After the brilliant organizers delivered Georgia, and the victories that were delivered by Black folks and brown folks in, Pennsylvania and Michigan and Arizona as well, you now see basically an attempt to strip American citizens of their right to express their will for a better future through the vote. And so all of those things, we have to sort of both recognize progress, but steel ourselves to be able to defend that progress. And this goes back to this idea of infrastructure and the importance of actually building infrastructure. And because infrastructure gives us the ability to not just achieve big things, but to hold on to those big things, but also to then face down the forces that really stand in the way of change. And so whether it is the forces in Silicon Valley profiting off of hate and allowing so much of the misinformation and disinformation to be so pervasive in our society, or whether it's police unions who are standing in the way of actually achieving safety and justice in communities and refusing to actually come to the table to actually move forward with how do we reimagine public safety. in our society, we have to have the power to face down those forces as well. And we don't have that if we act individually, if we act alone. And so to the extent that progress is so important, but the stories that can sometimes be told of progress of the past oftentimes have singular individuals who sort of fought and overcame things, instead of the stories of people coming together, building infrastructure, and then overcoming really big forces. That's the progress that's the story of progress that I'm inside of, and that's the story of progress that we are trying to make more of.
I think so many of us as humans are inspired by stories, and stories can really change the way people think about things. I intrinsically believe that hope is a necessary factor, a necessary element in motivating people. That hope, this idea that things can get better, and maybe I'm just programmed to think that way. I'm just thinking out loud, but I think I believe in that idea. Do you believe in that idea?
You know, I used to go into the voting booth with my grandfather, Eastern Long Island. Him and my family got there through the Great Migration, farm fields of Virginia to farm fields of Eastern Long Island. He used to take me to the voting booth. And the town we lived in Riverhead had a very large Polish population. So the names weren't always phonetic. I was learning how to read, and the names weren't always phonetic, but he asked me to read the names. And he put me on his shoulders back when they had those lever machines. And so we'd have to pull the lever and read the names. It was always exciting because, I was like, on my grandfather's shoulders, I was little and cute. I was getting a lot of attention going in to vote. And I always wanted to do it. And, after my grandfather died, I found out that he actually couldn't read or write. He went into the fields as a 6-year-old, a sharecropper, never got a formal education. He still wanted to participate in our democracy. He still believed that his voice mattered. He still wanted to engage, and part of probably why he was bringing me to the voting booth was, not bringing another adult in to help, but bringing a kid in, and he could be teaching me instead of me teaching him. I hope I got the names right. Sometimes he would correct me because, he paid attention to the news. But I think about him so much in our work, not just in terms of hope and aspiration, because it wasn't a hope without a deep understanding of the realities. My grandfather was a race man. He liked the Mets, not the Yankees, because he believed that the Yankees didn't give a black man a fair shot. And so he gave the credit to the Mets. And we went to Shea Stadium at the time, instead of up to the Bronx from Long Island to see games. And so it was very much this idea that centered on hope. And I think about the stories of the folks before him. I think about their migration from a violent, challenging, racist South to a violent, challenging, racist North. And the belief that there could be something more for them, that there was something worth fighting for. There was a belief in a better tomorrow. So hope is absolutely, has to be part of the story. Belief in something possible and something new, belief that the next generation can have more than what you have, and that is part of why you're in this story, but believing that you want more for yourself in that moment. My grandfather became a homeowner. He was part of a union. He helped get my dad in the union, where he learned a skill and became an entrepreneur. All of these things are very much part of the story and the legacy of people who are oppressed. It's part of the story of how we built social movements. It's the part of the story about why we build social movements. And I couldn't do this work every day without having a sense of hope, which is absolutely rooted in an idea that more is possible and better is possible, and that we as individuals can achieve it collectively with each other.
Rashad Robinson, President of Color Change, you are having such a huge impact. Thank you for being part of this summit. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, I want to turn back to all of you in the final moments we have together because we did it. We pulled off a virtual summit. We had planned to do this in person, and the pandemic shut it down, and we decided to go forward and try and do something different and try and create community through these screens. And it's been hard, but I think that it's been really meaningful and profound. And I hope it doesn't sound like a platitude. I believe it because I'm seeing the things that you're writing. I'm seeing the connections that are being made, the social media posts. And there's, these are all small things, but I think that all of you are part of something bigger. We're all part of a community, and I really thank you all for taking a risk on us and for being part of this summit. And I hope when we do a in real life summit, we can continue to do a virtual option as well, because this has been an amazing adventure. We've had people from 40 countries around the world take part in this event. Thousands and thousands of people have been able to be part of this summit in real time, as opposed to just 1,000 people when we do it in real life. So hopefully we'll continue. I think we'll continue to do this in the future. And I hope those of you who've made connections continue to deepen those connections and let us know and stay in touch with us and write to us and tweet at us. Send us your suggestions. We love it. We love, if I see you on the street, give me a high five. I love meeting you. I love hearing your stories. You guys are the best. I want to thank everybody who has made this summit possible, because it couldn't have happened without the support of just an incredible next level group of people. I'm going to say their names right now: John Isabella, Joanna Polowska, Farah Safari, Ali Prescott, El Manion, Gianna Capadona, Julia Carney, JC Howard, Casey Herman, Liz Metzger, Janet Ujong Lee, Anais Laurent, Mina Tavakoli, Megan McCarthy, Kristen Hume, Isabel Lara, Tori Borngasser, Nate Hoops, Jessica Goldstein, Neva Grant, Jeff Rogers, and Anya Grunman. So many people from across NPR came together to make this week's summit happen. And I am so grateful to all of you. And thank you to our production partners at Make It Mariko and Ad Virtual, who sent cameras out to everybody. That's why so many people looked so great. And these beautiful screens and these interactive activities. Thank you so much. Thank you all again for being part of this community. Thank you to our presenting sponsor, GoDaddy, and our supporting sponsors, Dell Technologies and Bulldog Online Yoga, for making this week's summit possible. It's been an incredible 4 days. What can I say? And I hope to see you in real life in 2022. Thank you all so much for being here. It's been such an honor to be your host for these past 4 days.